Welcome to Relationship Matters with your host, Melvin.
And Monica Jenkins. The purpose of our program is to give you strategies on dating and
choosing the correct mate and having a successful marriage. Greetings and good evening to you. I'm Melvin, and this is Monica, my lovely wife, and we're here tonight to start our first program tonight that God has put in our spirits that we want to speak to the people about grief. When we deal with grief, it's a hard pill to swallow at the time when it happens, because usually what happens first is death, and then after the death is grief. And just to tell a story behind that, how we got to where we are, about 16 years ago, our son was diagnosed with cancer. And while he was yet diagnosed with cancer, I was yet pastoring. And while pastoring, I continued to do the work of the Lord. And I continued to tell my son, we're going to have faith and we're going to believe God and trust God, and he's going to heal you. Well, God did what he said he was going to do, because of the fact that he went through his first round of chemo and radiation and things of that sort, had surgery, and God healed him, came back, had a clean bill of health. When he got the clean bill of health back, we said, look at God, look what God has done. He continued on with his collegiate career, and 6 to 8 months later, the cancer came back, and here's my son again saying, Dad, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to fight it just like we fought it before. And he began to fight it again, and our faith held on, and he got another clean bill of health, and he continued on with his collegiate career. Probably a year later, the cancer came back again, which puts us right about at 13 years ago when the cancer came back. And the cancer struck, and the cancer thought it won, but really God won, because God answered our prayers when we said, God, heal our son, and he healed him by letting him go home to glory. I said all that to say that with death comes grief, and with grief comes all other types of problems. And statistics state that when a couple loses a child, the numbers of divorce goes in another direction. I'll let my lovely wife talk about that.
Yeah, statistics say that back 13 years ago was 75% of marriages ended in divorce when you lose a child. Now it's actually up to 80%. I think that was the number one factor for me. I really wanted us to understand that the odds are against us, but greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. And we held fast to the belief of what God had given us to do. And even though it hurts sometimes, and sometimes some of the memories are painful, when you see a mom with her son or see a dad with his son, sometimes it hurts. But I thank God that through it all, we're still here, we're still together, we're still trusting God for everything that he's doing and how he's doing it. And then it also gives us an avenue to talk to people about grief, because the saints don't handle grief well, just like everyone else. And sometimes you need someone to tell you that if I can make it, you can make it too.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. So that's where it brings us to the point that we're at today when you're dealing with grief, is that when you're dealing with grief, you have to deal with it in your own personal way. Oftentimes what we do is we'll take grief and we'll put it in a small compartment and say, I'll deal with it later, or the spouse or the partner may decide that they want to deal with it now, and you don't want to deal with it now, because when you deal with it, it brings up madness in your spirit that you don't want to even be here. It can cause a spirit of suicide to come upon you because you don't want to be here because that loved one's gone. But it's hard because if you put it in a compartment and not decide to deal with it, it can be detrimental to your health also. Um, Others can deal with grief in other ways, but grief not only comes, we're dealing with, realistically, we want to deal with the death of a child. And I would like to dedicate this show tonight to my son because he's the one that the Lord took home, and we're still celebrating his life even though he's not here. And so we want to help some couple or some family that has lost a child, whether or not it was a tragedy or what have you. Anytime you deal with death, the question always is why. Our son was only 22, going on 23, and we want to know why, because he wasn't a child that was into drugs. He wasn't a child that was mischievous and lying and cheating and doing stuff. He was going to school. He was bettering himself. So understand this: when you're dealing with grief, you got to deal with it the way that you need to deal with it. So with that being said, I would like to just touch on, just for a few minutes, the attitude of getting over it. And I'll say this, and Monica, you can agree with me on this. You really never get over it.
I
You know?
agree.
So because at times when you think you've gotten past it and the struggle's real, and you've gotten to a point where you feel comfortable, something will trigger, a mechanism will trigger a memory, or it'll trigger something that you and that child used to do, and it could traumatize you. Amen?
Yeah.
So,
I think that sometimes memories, I think they're always good to have the memories, but sometimes some days, like a birthday or the anniversary where the child died, or not even necessarily just a child. Some people are really still struggling with their parents' death, or a close relative, a close friend, a sibling. Sometimes when those anniversary days come around, a lot of people want to celebrate and do a balloon release and have a birthday party, and some people aren't ready for that. And I think that you need to respect where that person is, especially your spouse, where your spouse is at the time, because everyone does not grieve the same.
true.
And so, like in our case, I used to always ask you, like, why don't you feel the way I feel? But you expressed your grief in a different way. And I expressed my grief by wanting to be alone or shutting down. And it sometimes takes the couple to have some sort of communication
Yes.
in order to get past it, to realize that they're not alone, to realize that God is yet in control. And I tell people all the time, if God was not the center of my joy, I honestly would probably be in a padded cell, because when my son died, it was overwhelming for me. But I thank God for him sending his only begotten son.
Yes, yes. See, because everyone takes grief differently. So in our case with our son, one of the things that would bother me is when I see another father and son in a sports activity or just out having fun and laughing, and I can't do that because that was my only son. But when you're dealing with grief, you have to deal with it on your own level. So you have to learn how to cope with it, and while you're learning how to cope with it, also you have to take into account how is your spouse coping with it. And that dwells down to communication, because the way she dealt with it was different than the way I dealt with it, and with her dealing with it a different way than I dealt with it, sometimes it can cause division, but God is not the author of confusion. So if you really trust God in the midst of the grief, and say, well, God, how should I handle this? How should I deal with this? You will take it in stages. And when you take it in stages, what you do is you got to understand that I got to understand her part of it, and she's got to understand my part of it. And I can't be negative in the way that she thinks about it, because she wants to deal with it this way. Because we're a partnership. We're one. When we said I do, we became one. And so when she's in pain, I'm in pain, and when I'm in pain, she's in pain. And so for us to really, really deal with the grief, we have to have an understanding of where each of us are. And one may be on the cloud and the other one may be in the valley, but now we got to come to some place, a plateau somewhere in the middle, so that we can cope with the situation, because she may have to cheer me up in this area, or I may have to cheer her up in that area. So grief is part of life. It's something that we really don't want to deal with because it's painful.
Right.
Because anytime you lose something that you love, it hurts. It hurts all in your spirit. And when it hurts so much in your spirit, all you can do is dwell on the good memories. And with a child, you got birthdays, you got the day of birth. I mean, the date of death. I'm sorry. These things happen, and then that always bring you back to remembrance. Or on a special day, we always did this. Or on Thanksgiving, we sat and we did this, while the rest of the family did this. But this was part of our tradition. On Thanksgiving, we did this. And it was always me and my son, we did this. Or we went out in the yard and we played basketball on Thanksgiving, whether it was snow or rain. And we went outside and we did this. And now every time that holiday comes around, you're not able to celebrate that with them because they're not here anymore. And so that brings back, it's a good memory, but then yet it triggers something to cause you to possibly grieve again.
Yes. And anniversary dates and different dates also bring things out that you may not want to deal with at certain times. Mm-hmm. And so the good thing about having a spouse is you guys communicate and talk about where you are.
Yes, yes.
If I'm having there's certain movies that my husband will say, okay, you can't watch this movie because he knows what the ending is, or so he looks out for me with things like that. And there's certain things that we will navigate through because we know that this is not going to be a good outcome if we participate in this or participate in that. And it doesn't mean that we're jealous of someone that has 5 sons. It just means that we're smart and we know what we can handle and what we can't handle. And it's okay to tell your family, I don't want to do that birthday party this year. It's okay. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people get trapped into having to say yes just because people are telling you this is what you should do. But it's definitely okay to say, no, I don't want to do that this time. I'm going to do something different this year, but thank you for your suggestion. It's okay. And then I think one year we did a balloon celebration. Most recently, we had a 3-on-3 basketball tournament because my son was a basketball player. He got his foot amputated and got a prosthesis and went right back and played basketball at the college level again. So we did things that we knew that he loved to do and things that were important to him. And that made it made me feel good. Mm-hmm. It made our daughters feel good. Our oldest daughter put it all together. And then the money that was raised, we donated it to the Cancer Foundation, and it was in his name. And I think sometimes if you do something with the grief that's good and positive, it will help you navigate your way through whatever you're dealing with at that time.
Amen. Well, with that being said, I thought about it, and we're dealing with the death of a child, but let me help those who are not dealing with, say, per se, a death of a child. You're dealing with the death of a parent, or let's say a death that was accidental, and it hurts. It puts you, it stigmatizes you, and triggers something every time you hear about something like that. See, because in most cases, most of us were not to say brainwashed, but built on that. As a parent, our children would bury us. We don't bury our children, and that was a conversation that my son and I had one day while sitting in the hospital room, and we were just communicating, and he made a statement to me, and I responded to him. I said, "Son, you don't understand. If I could trade places with you, I would." And he understood where I stood with it, because I would have rather been laying in that hospital bed with the cancer and him sitting there with me, because I was the parent. I've lived most of my life. He hadn't even lived half of what I had lived. So when you deal with death and grief, they go hand in hand, but there's levels that you have to deal with it on, because every little thing could trigger you, and when it triggers you, you deal with it differently. So I guess what I want to tell somebody is that you have to grieve. You grieve in your own way, amen? Because what you do is you take time to grieve. In my wife's case, she likes to be alone, so she would go and to the bedroom, close the door, and I understood, and I would give her time to grieve, but I couldn't allow her just to stay there all the time. I would have to go and disrupt it and break it up. So what I guess what I'm trying to say is that you need to put your grieving on a timetable. And I know someone may be saying, Elvin, I got to disagree with you on that. But let me explain it to you like this. Life still has to go on. And since life still has to go on, but yet you still have to grieve, you have to put it in a timetable. Whereas you might say, from this time to this time is my grieving time, and I just need to be alone. From this time to this time, I want to go sit, and some people like to go to the cemetery and talk to the loved one. I can't do that. That's just not in my DNA. I just can't do it. It probably would trigger something in me. That's just not me. Some people will seek additional help and go to grief counseling. Some people will go to different types of group meetings, support groups, and that's not for me.
I went.
My wife can go, but I can't go, because instead of encouraging me, it discouraged me.
And in my case, I went looking for answers and end up basically running a group. So I think I'm at my best when I'm helping someone.
All right.
So when I went to those groups, I help people, I minister to them, and it made me feel better. So in my case, it worked for me. And I didn't try to force him to come and join in with me if that wasn't something that he was led to do. But what we did was we had an understanding of what may work for me may not work for him. And like he said about the going in the room and closing the door and turning off the lights, and I just like to be there in that moment. But pulling me out of that moment was good for me, because I never fell into depression and anxiety and things like that. So he helped me be able to cope, and I did do it at a time limit, in a cycle. So I think that it worked. And if you aren't honest with yourself or honest with your spouse, then your spouse can't help you, because your spouse doesn't know what it is that's bothering you.
Yes. So the point of emphasis that I really want to make is that you have to make time to grieve. And when I say make time to grieve, what I mean is you got to find a space that you're going to grieve, because it's healthy for you to grieve. I know you might not like what I'm saying, but it's healthy for you to grieve because of the fact that this allows you to relieve some of this stress that's put upon you because this child or this job or this parent or whatever it may be, because grief comes in all different packages. But we're talking about with death, when you're grieving in death, it, it'll bring up so many memories that it'll have you thinking crazy thoughts. And so while you're yet going through the grieving process, make space for it. And while you're making space for it, you have to understand in a relationship, a husband and wife relationship, you have to make space for the spouse to also grieve. And when I say make space for the spouse to grieve, what I'm talking about is this. There's all type of support groups out there. There's all type of clergy out there that you can go get counseling from. There's friends and family. But the person that you really need to be getting the counseling from, the person you really need to be getting the communication from is that partner, that spouse. Because you guys are in this together. And while you're yet in this thing together, you got to be able to sit down, talk, talk through the situation. You know what I miss the most about our child. I did not like the way he used to do that, but I never told him that he didn't do it like that. And I was going to teach him how to do it that way. Have these conversations. So what you should do, one of the do's that you should do, and I don't know what family I'm trying to help tonight, but what you should do is take 15 or 20 minutes. Set your time frame every day or once a week or every other day. Take 15, 20 minutes of time just to communicate and deal with the grief. Let your spouse expound on how she's feeling, or you expound on how you're feeling about the death of this child, or what you're grieving, and express it. And then now let me help you right here. While that partner is expressing how they feel, as the recipient, listen. Put on your ears to listen what they're saying, and don't be negative with the response to what they're saying, but say, tell me some more about it. Expound on it a little bit more. Get a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, because it's kind of like a oil digger. When he go digging for oil, he just don't keep digging for oil on the surface. He keeps on digging until he gets down till he breaks to get the oil gusher to come out. And so we can't get to the root of it until we keep pulling the scabs off. And the longer we pull off the scabs, to say, tell me some more. Say more about that.
That's awesome, because that means that you're showing that spouse that you care.
Right.
You're showing them that it's important to me. Your pain is important to me, and it makes them feel as if they can give you that information because they're already vulnerable, and then they're okay with giving you more information because you're allowing them to express themselves. Mm-hmm. And so it also gives them permission to expound on what's bothering them. So I think that's fantastic, because given that time, it makes me feel like I'm not bothering you.
Yes. And while you're in that vein, you say, well, how are you feeling about this? Or you can turn the table around and say, well, I feel this about, but how do you feel about it? And then now you have an open forum, a dialect going on where you're communicating and you're trying to close in on what the root is of this thing. And so once you get down into the root of it, now you can start picking away at it. You can start getting the stuff that ain't right in there out, so that you'll start feeling better. And then while you're doing that, it helps not only your spirit man, it helps your physical man, because if you grieve a long time, it takes effect on your body.
Yes.
And what grief causes stress, and stress causes high blood, low blood, and all kind of other little stuff where you don't even do activities no more. And so when that conversation is going on, it should be more say, well, you just said that. I'm curious about that. Expound on it a little bit more. Tell me something else about what's going on with that situation. Why do you feel that way? And that'll help not only your spouse, it'll help you, because like you said, it makes the spouse understand that you really are concerned about them, along with trying to figure out how to resolve taking away some of the pain, because it'll never go away. It'll always still be there, but yet you're still chipping away at how can we function through this, knowing that he was your favorite of your kids.
You just threw shade. I think that it also gives us a chance to really convey different feelings, because at different times you have different feelings about the whole matter that they're not here anymore. Sometimes you're angry. Sometimes you have you question God. You want to know why that this had to happen, and people will tell you not to question God and not to ask, but it's okay to ask. It's not okay just to stay down in the depression state. That's what's not okay. So sometimes you asking that question, you might get clarity just by talking to your spouse, and your spouse may be able to assist you with some revelation. It's just a matter of really talking about your feelings, and I think that is the number one thing you have to communicate, even outside of this particular topic. Communication is everything. So we have to do that.
So when you're having this conversation and you're asking questions, my advice is not to give advice, if that make any sense to you.
Okay.
Because the reason why I say that is this. So if you feel one way about something and I give you advice that's contrary to the way that you're feeling, it can cause conflict. And then now you have a conflict where it's causing resentment in the relationship. Whereas if I ask the question without giving advice and just having you to expound on it, it gets rid of that strife. Because here's where I'm going with this, is because we need to be at a point where we can communicate. It's okay to communicate with your sisters and your brothers and a clergyman and maybe a parent if they're living, or a spiritual godmom or a spiritual father or something of that sort. But what happens is, because of that divorce rate that you talked about, you ended up one of them end up speaking to someone that they work with, or they end up speaking to someone that will listen to what they have to say. And then now what that causes is a division in the marriage, because you always calling this person and usually they're of the opposite sex, and it's clean. You're just getting some advice on this situation of the grief, but something else leads into it. Well, she listens to me, or he listens to me. You don't listen to me. Every time we talk, we're arguing. So what it does is it sets the platform. When you have this dialect between the husband and the wife, it gets rid of all of this strife that could happen.
Exactly, because it's very easy to confide in someone else, especially if they're going to listen. So if your spouse isn't doing the listening or the talking, it's very easy to get sidetracked and to someone asks you how you're doing, and you feel like they're really concerned, and they begin to talk to you and pour into you. It's very easy to get sidetracked. That's why the divorce rate is so high when you're dealing with grief, because you're not having that communication with the spouse. It's obvious that that spouse is not talking to you or communicating with you about your feelings or about your concerns. And even if you get to the point where someone has shut all the way down and you end up talking to your spouse, but you feel like you're talking to a brick wall, I say figure out another form of communication. Don't necessarily talk. There was a time in our marriage we passed notes to each other. Our kids couldn't read, so they took the notes up and down stairs to us, and we would read the note and then respond to the note and send the kid back down with the note. Find a form of communication. You might want to text. You might want to send an email if you're not able to just verbally talk to one another, but don't shut down communicating. You have to be able to communicate some type of way.
Yes, yes. Now with that also, I just talked about what we should take time to grieve, but we also should take a break from grieving. And what do I mean by that is that we have what we call date night before COVID came along. It was a night once a week, usually Fridays. We would go to the movies. We would go somewhere and do something where we could laugh, where we could have a good time, get away from the regular, day to day, and because that's healthy for you. We will go somewhere and laugh or schedule a date. Take time to, if it's just go for a walk in the park, go walk up and down the riverfront, whatever it may be. But you got to do things that individuals do to keep your mind off of the grief. So you need to take a break from it. And now, when you take that break from it, what you're really doing is it's almost like before the loved one passed. These were the things you guys did before. So do a few of the things that you did before now, even though it still hurts, but it helps because if you take that break, it helps you because you need to laugh. Okay?
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that we did well, that we continue our, I think it was Thursdays back then.
Yes, yes.
Doing things, having dates, having date nights, or just maybe watching something on the television together. I know when our children were growing up on Thursdays, it was a mandate that we all came together and we did whatever we were going to do, watch the Cosbys or whatever we were going to do that night, and we all came together. I think that doing something that's familiar too helps you cope a little better.
Yes, yes. And then now also when these anniversary dates come up, when the birthdays and the date of birth and anniversaries and things like that come up, special holidays, one of the things I like to try to do, it's not that I don't forget the date that it happened. It's more of I try to plan something else to try to keep her mind off of it. See, there's a nugget for somebody. I plan other things to do to keep her mind off of it. I haven't forgotten what that date is, but I'm trying to, keep pushing, because if every time the date comes around, we rescind back 3 years, that's not healthy for our bodies. And now why I say I'm going there with that, with the bodies, because when you are stressed or dealing with grief, you start letting your body go, and if you let your body go, then your health goes. And also, when your health begins to go, it messes with your sex drive. And so, if it messes with your sex drive, sex is healthy for a married couple. So you have to understand that you have to keep yourself healthy, and while you're yet in a sexual relationship with your husband or your wife, you have to do things so that it's affirming. We're being candid and transparent. Don't nobody want nobody just like a dead log. I'm just being transparent, because we're men and women here, and I don't believe any children are listening to this show, but sex makes you feel good. I know I got it right, but that's all right. And also, it can make you feel vulnerable. So I guess what I'm trying to say is to stay in the presence and talk about it with your partner. Say, before our child passed, we used to do this and we used to do this. Can we get back to a little bit of normalcy, because I'm feeling neglected in this area, and let's at least talk about it so we can get back on the path that we used to be on, because we are husband and wife.
Right.
So when we do that, it's very helpful, because we need that. And then also we need to seek, if that's not working to the best of our abilities, I would suggest in the African American community, We say that we don't use counselors, but most of us have good employment. Use them insurance cards and seek professional support. You know, that's what these people went to school for. They specialize in this. They went and took all these psychology classes, this, that, and the other. So, because if you don't deal with the grief, here's what happens. It turns into depression.
It's going to turn into something for sure.
And that depression, what it does, it ends up becoming, it isolates you. It messes with your sleep habits, which in a sense messes with your sexual habits, and it messes with your body. And now your biological clock's upside down, and you don't know if you're coming or you're going. So these are some things that we need to touch on, what we need to do so that we can handle this grief in a relationship and do it as one body.
I think that a lot of times when we're grieving, we get so caught up in the me syndrome because we're worried about me. It hurts me and it's about me. And if you ever just take a little bit of time to think about this is affecting other people. Think about the funeral or the service. If I think about my son's service, he affected a lot of people. We tried to count the amount of cars that were in that
Processional.
we tried to count them, but we couldn't even count them. There were so many. So that person in your life that isn't there, that person has affected other people as well. And you'd be surprised to find out how grateful people were just to be in that person's life. And that sometimes will help you, get out of the me syndrome, thinking that it's only about me and it's I only hurt. You'll kind of realize that they touched other people's lives.
Yes. Now when you're dealing with grief is part of life. Let's just say it like that. Death's going to happen, then you're going to grieve. It's part of life. Grief is not something that medicine can fix. Grief is something that you have to go through. And so while you're going through it, you need to understand this, and I'm going to talk about some don't do's right here. Don't judge. I'm going to say that again. Don't judge the person for how they're accepting the grief. Allow time to pass. Also, don't, and I'm talking to those who came up in the African American families that wasn't saved and sanctified. Some of them were, that would go and drown their sorrows in alcohol. I don't know who I came to talk to, but I know that this is what happened when I was growing up. People died all the time in my family, and they would come up from down south, come to my grandmother's house. Everybody stayed there. You know how it was in the 70s and the 80s. Everybody came. They didn't go to hotels. Everybody came and stayed at the house. Made all of us sleep on the floor, make a pallet, sleep on the floor. Everybody came to the house, and then after the funeral, after the service, they would get drunk. And I thought growing up that was a normacy, in which that's ridiculous. All you're doing is adding sorrow onto the pain that you already have. Because after you get hungover and wake up the next day, it's still going to be there. Why not seek God and ask God for a way to relieve this pain where you still ain't, and then don't have a hangover in the morning? Come on now, somebody.
But now some of the women aren't drinking, they're shopping.
Help them. Also, don't hurry to make decisions. What happens a lot of times is you have an opinion about something, and it's a short-term opinion. You just come out and make a decision about something, and the funeral service just ended. You got to understand that there's long-term decisions that have to be made. Another point I wanted to make was don't erase the loved one's memories. So if sometimes we're just sitting around the house and we're just talking or whatever, and I just might quote something or say something that my son would say. He was notorious for saying, "She won't be, Dad." And I used to laugh at him. We would go in a store, and a young lady might be looking at him, and I would notice it. Yeah, she was looking at you. She want me, Dad. I'm telling you, she want me. And I would just say that out of the blue, because that's a memory that I remember of him, and it makes us laugh. He had a friend that he had a nickname for him, and every time he would say that name, I just started laughing because he had a friend, and I'm not going to say his name because he might be on the line or what have you, but he would say, yep, he's going to tell another story because he was notorious for telling stories that were not true, or it would be exaggerated above and beyond whatever the other person was saying. So those little things like that are memories that we remember of our son and some of his behaviors and some of the things that he would do that would trigger little things that bring you back to your remembrance. One of the things he was known for, he loved name brand items, and he would say, "Dad, you can't wear a Nike sweatsuit with Adidas gym shoes." So these are little things that would just trigger in my spirit, and they just bring back remembrances of good things, good memories. And he was no angel. He had some mistakes and hiccups here and there. But you remember those too, and you just laugh about it because I remember that night when this happened, and he's like, oh yeah, that's what ended up happening. So he explained himself this way. So never erase your loved one's memories.
Yeah, I think that is smart. I was thinking about the day, I think he turned 13, and I guess he was 13, so he thought that he could kind of do what he wanted to do and say what he wanted to say to me. And one of his friends were walking up the walkway, and he just kept getting smart, and I flipped him over, and his friend was walking up the walkway and turned around and said, I'm going to come back later. I think about that sometimes because I'm like, just because you're 13 and you're taller than me don't mean I won't flip you. But, I mean, I laugh about it, but then it wasn't funny, but,
Right.
but now it is.
All right. So long story short, when you're dealing with grief and you're dealing with it with your partner, that's the person that you need to communicate with. You don't need to be outside unless you guys are dealing with a professional counselor. You don't go and talk to XYZ person for hours at a time, and you and your spouse are not communicating or talking about any of this information. So your spouse is feeling left out. Your spouse is thinking something else is going on when you really realistically could be getting some information, but you're not sharing it with your spouse, or even taking your spouse with you in that same vineyard to try to find out what can be done to help throughout this grief process. And while you're going through it, you got to stay concentrated on getting through it, because if you don't stay concentrated on it, what will happen is one will feel left out, and while that one's feeling left out, then here comes this big division, and now here we are tapping on this thing called divorce. And you said I do, and you also said in those vows, to death do us part. So when you say to death do us part, means that you in it to win it, even through the good days and the bad days. Well, death, then grief is the bad days, and that's something that you have to deal with, and oftentimes it hurts because of that one may have been the one that kept you guys connected. So even in that, what happens is this: the older you get in this walk, then you become in your home, end up in an empty nest, and now how do you deal with that?
If you stay together, you're gonna have an empty nest. Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah, you're gonna have an empty nest. So now you got to get back to, all right, well, we ain't got the kids no more. So what are we gonna do? So now.
So you're not married to a stranger if you have some kind of communication.
Right. It ain't just two people in the room and ain't got nothing to say to each other. Like we could talk about, when our children did this, or when this child did that, or remember the trip we took to here, or when we went to Egypt, or when we went here or went there. These are conversations that you can have because the communication lines are open, and then when something's going on, you can do what we call conflict resolution. We can get together and decide, how are we going to handle this? How can we resolve this so that we can press on.
I was also going to say, not only to communicate with one another, but maybe sometimes people should go back to writing letters. Like, I think it's a lost art. Like, write me a letter, send me a poem. I want to, go old school.
Well, we can do it on these iPads and these computers nowadays. That way you ain't got to worry about the manuscript, because I don't think handwriting is done anymore.
What type of letter then?
Yes, yes. So when we're dealing with grief as a couple, there's times when things become rough, and while you're going through the rough stages of it, keep doing the do's. Keep that communication line open. It goes back to when we birthed this relationship matters. My spirit kept saying people need to have counseling before they get married, because we did not have counseling when we got married. And I stress it to young people because people get married for all the wrong reasons. And when I say that, I'm talking about get the counseling that will help you to stick and stay. And when I say somebody has to stick and stay, because you need questions asked, and a lot of young couples say, well, we've asked that question, we asked that question. No, you didn't ask the right questions, because there's questions in her mind, there's questions in his mind that never came to surface. Yes, during the glory days, the honeymoon days, everything was great. Most of you, if you're not in the church, you start shacking before you got into, before you got married. Some of you are in the church and you're shacking. That's another story, but anyway, you're doing what you do, and you say, well, we just like being married. You're not married until you sign that paper, until you say I do. And once you get that license, because even a dog got license. So we have to sign those papers, and that makes it legitimate that you're my husband, I'm your wife, vice versa, and you deal with that situation to the best of your ability. Because when you have that counseling, then now when grief trickles in, it helps you deal with it, because you had some consultation in the beginning and a lot of questions were already answered, and now that those questions are answered, now you can learn how to deal and cope with different things. See, because dealing and coping with the death of a parent is totally different. Yes, it hurts. That person is the one that raised you from an infant until you were an adult, and you got to spend most of your adult years with them, but you expect for them to die before you. You don't expect
True.
for your child to die before you.
True.
Even though it still hurts, it's still grief. On those days, you have memories that pop up and thoughts that come up, but it's a difference. Whether you like it or not, it's a difference. A tragic death is different than a close loved one with a sickness. It's different because if someone has cancer or been diagnosed with some terminal disease, you have an expectancy date. But if it's tragic, a car accident, a drive-by shooting, a drug overdose, that's unexpected. And especially for someone who didn't do drugs. So now it questions your mind, how do I deal with this? And every time something comes up, you get angry. So the bottom line is, to deal with grief as a couple, you have to communicate, and through the communication, if the communication is not working, get you a seasoned support group, such as a professional counselor or clergy that you trust, because you can't trust all clergy. Some of them, you tell them your information, and next thing you know, your information is being preached over the pulpit. Lord, help them today. But I came to talk about dealing with grief with couples. And I hope I touched on a lot of points today. I hope I touched on something that would help you deal with it. Take those 15 minutes and listen to your spouse, take those 15 minutes and expound on it and go back and forth in rhetoric, trying to find out, be curious about it, what you feel this way because or what have you, and understand and be sympathetic also and say, I know that must be hard. Let me give you one example of that, then I'm done. Where I work at, there's a lot of other men that work with me, and all of them have sons. And oftentimes they'll say, I'm going to play golf with my son. I'm a golf addict. I love golf. I'm going to play golf with my son, or my son's coming to play golf with me. Well, I can never say my son is coming to play golf with me. And sometimes that triggers me to say, okay, they say, well, you want to come play? Sometimes I may not even want to play because it's you and your son. I got to play golf with my father one time. It was me and my dad on a Father's Day outing, and another, my ex-brother-in-law and his father were there, and so it was father and sons playing golf. I could never have a father and son golf outing that I participate in, not with a biological son. Now I could do it with some of my spiritual sons, but it's good, but it's not the same, because this is the one I raised from a little lad and till he was a grown man, till he was taller than me, and now I don't have that availability now. And then other times I'll see some of them talking about, my grandkids, their name carries on because their sons had kids, and those kids have their same last name. None of my grandkids will have my last name because all the rest of my children are girls. I love them dearly. I'm okay with my name not carrying on because I get good to see these grandkids, but it triggers that there'll never be another little Jenkins because of the fact that my namesake is gone home to glory. So we were set for an appointed time to be here, and we're here doing what the work of the Lord, and I thank God for allowing us to continue on doing what we're doing in ministry, and I pray that we can help somebody through grief within their relationships and their marriage. Any other kind of way we can help you with your marriage, we would love to be here for you, and hopefully this program will give you some information, some nuggets, some strategies on how to cope and deal with different things in your life. So we thank you for allowing us to be in your homes this evening and just giving God, the one who woke me up this morning, all of the glory. And I thank God for my beautiful spouse. She's wonderful. She takes care of me, and she's my only wife. And as my bishop would say, my wife for life. And I thank you for this evening. And I'm just going to ask Monica, will you pray us out?
Well, I wanted to say two things.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Because you think a little different than I do as far as I love my son-in-laws, and I know it's not exactly the same, but they really treat me like I'm really their mom.
Amen.
And that does something really special for me.
Yes.
And I thank God for them. I think my daughters could not have married any better men.
They got two good guys.
And so my relationship was probably different from your relationship because we have a mom and a son relationship, just like me and little Melvin's relationship. I was his favorite. Mm-hmm. I hope you know that. But I am grateful for them because they really do. I mean, I think sometimes I talk to Jessie more than I talk to Melvisha. I really do. Sometimes she gets frustrated and gets angry with me. But that's what I wanted to say. I'm grateful for them, and I'm grateful that I do have two sons, and I adore my grandson tremendously. So I thank God for another boy.
And on that note, I love my son-in-laws too, don't get me wrong. If y'all hear me and talking to you, I do love y'all. But that grandson of mine, I'm going to turn him into the golfer, though. He going to be the one to carry on the golfing mantle.
He'll probably do it too. Oh, gracious Father, we thank you for this time that we have spent. We ask, Lord God, for those that have any issues with their grieving or any issues in their marriage, that you will touch them right now in the name of Jesus. We speak to the need being met right now. God, we ask that you cover them with your blood. We thank you right now for who you are in their lives, and we thank you, God, for putting someone in their lives that will help mentor them back together again. And we thank you right now, God. We thank you for everything that you've done and everything that you're going to do in Jesus' name. And we ask, Lord God, that you will continue to cover them and continue to bring them closer together in love and unity. And I did want to also give a shout out for my makeup.
Yes.
Keisha, the MUA, Flow, I believe it's called colorflowartistry.com. God bless you.
Also tell them about the website.
Oh, Greater Shiloh Deliverance Ministry. .com is our website, and if you want to go and ask, do any questions for next week, we have an email address that is what's the email address?
GSD Ministries.
No, I don't know it. You can ask a question from the website. Just do the website. I forgot the Gmail. I think it's Real Matters.
Relationship Matters 99.
Relationship Matters 99 at gmail.com. God bless you.
Thank you for joining Relationship Matters. Catch us again next Tuesday at 6 p.m. on Worship Radio International as we continue to enlighten you about strength in relationships. For all questions, please email us at relationshipmatters99@gmail.com. Again, that's relationshipmatters99@gmail.com. If you would like to sow a seed into the ministry, there's 2 ways that you can do that. Through Cash App, $GSD Ministries, again, $GSD Ministries, or go to our website at GreaterShilohDeliveranceMinistries.com. Thank you.